It's a cold morning in the mountains of southern Appalachia. When I got up this morning, it was 25 degrees. For the past few mornings, we've had heavy, hard freezes. We knew that it wasn't ready for true warm weather yet. This is typical of our springs, to have some warm days and then to have Old Man Winter come hurling back with his wind and his cold. This morning I'm going to walk around and kind of see what I can see. We weren't too worried about things getting bit back here at our house since we're on the north side of the mountain. Typically the sun doesn't, because of the way the sun shines, I'm about 2 weeks behind people that are on down, even in my own holler here on down the road, but especially on down through the settlement of Brasstown. So none of our blueberries are bloomed, none of our apple trees have bloomed out yet. So we're not really concerned with things like that, but I still want to walk around and just take a look and see what's going on. That's the ice from the chicken water this morning that I poured out, and you can see it's not melted any. It will when the sun gets in here later today though. So inside the greenhouse you can see the temperature almost at 50, about 50. You can see too the sun's beginning to shine in here, so that should warm it up pretty quick. Here's our cabbages that are still inside. They're still looking good. Our tomatoes have not sprouted yet. This cold weather has certainly delayed them, I know. And then you can see a couple of calendula there. They made it through just fine. We've been leaving our little heater on in here in the last couple of nights. It doesn't keep it balmy by no means, but it does knock the chill off and keep things from freezing. Back here in the back where we've been so wet for so long, for so many days and even so many weeks, you can see overnight the moisture in the ground has frozen. You can see all those little icicles there in the ground. Almost looks like a little skiff of snow in certain areas. I know it doesn't pick up probably on the camera, but this whole little area here, as I walk by it, it just glitters like it's got glitter all over it where those ice crystals are picking up the sunshine. Just after daylight this morning, when I went to let the chickens out and feed them, I just happened to look down and notice these little irises here. You can see there's a bloom, but you can also see their leaves are kind of already frozen and mushy. They've changed colors compared to what they were yesterday. Well, right beside them is some of my hostas, and can you hear the ice? Frozen solid. So probably what will happen is it'll just, once the sun gets in here and hits this, it'll just kind of wilt over, as will the violets, but they'll both come back. They're both very hardy, so they'll come right back once warm weather returns to the mountains. This is my Lenten roses. They're about done blooming, but you can see what that cold has done. They've kind of all drooped over. They will spring back. They'll be fine, and they're almost through their blooming season anyway. So I wouldn't bother to cover them up, though, even if they weren't. They love the cold weather, so once the sun gets in here and things warm up, they will rise back up. But you can see where they've kind of flopped over during the last 2 nights of these hard freezes. And you see the cold weather didn't hurt these early spring little flowers. I don't even know the names of them, but they bloom in the spring. But here's more hostas that I can feel they're frozen. There's water inside them and they're frozen, so those will probably flop over too, and then they'll have to come back out. So I said our blueberries had not bloomed, but as you can see, this one is just about to bloom. We have several varieties of blueberries. This is one of the early barren ones, so you can see there's, hopefully they're not totally bloomed out, so hopefully this one will be okay. But then just behind this one is where all of our late barren blueberries are. They typically don't get ripe until even late July, almost August, and they've not even got, there's not even hardly a bud on them. So I'm sure those will be okay. I don't know about this one bush. We'll just have to see what happens. Nature's own Christmas ornament. I couldn't resist coming up the creek a little ways to check on this little spring here. It's kind of a wet weather spring. It always stays damp. But sometimes if it gets really dry, it kind of dries up. You can see how it's flowing out now though. We've had so much rain, so it's definitely filled up this little pond here, which it has for the last several years. We've been in this wet weather pattern. And in the spring of the year, this is full of tadpoles, absolutely chock full. So it's a little early for them, but I just couldn't resist coming up here and seeing if I could see anything, which I see nothing but the water. No ice or anything around it either. Not even at the edges, which the sun's shining in here pretty good now. If there was any little pieces of ice, I guess it would have melted by now. Well, I ended up going much further than I thought to look around. I went off down the hill. I couldn't resist going up through the creek and seeing what was going on up there. And now I'm froze to death. I should have worn me some gloves and probably something larger under my coat than just a thin sweater. But I didn't think I was going to go that far. I really enjoyed my cold trip though, walking up through there. So beautiful to see the woods any time of the year. But now I think I'm going to go in and warm by the wood stove. So I come in and made myself a cup of hot chocolate, and I've come down to sit by the wood stove for a little while till I kind of thaw out, and then I can get back to work, the things I've got to do today. But I really enjoyed my walk outside. It was so exhilarating to be out this time of the year. I love to be outside any time of the year. I'm a real outdoors person. And each season has the things that are best about it. But this cold weather, of course, it's, you don't want to get out in the cold, you don't want to leave your warm house. But once you really do force yourself kind of to do it, whether it's just a walk down the road to the mailbox or sit on the porch for a few minutes or something like that, it really invigorates you, really gives you an exhilarating feeling. It makes my lungs feel freer and my sinuses and all that, probably especially now because we're just getting over having a cold. And a lot of people have a regular little walk, maybe down their street or something they do. I think that's really a great thing to do. I don't typically walk down the road very much, but we have a nice kind of loop. It's not really nothing that we planned over the years, but there's so many different ways up the creek where we talk about walking to go that way. And Matt has a trail that he's cut many years ago, and that's typically we'll just leave the back porch and go out through the backyard, up the ridge. We're kind of sidling out the ridge and then down and then on up. But another way, years ago before our house was here, when I was a kid, what we would do is we'd start from Pap's house and we'd go kind of down the hill and through the woods. And then up that way, and then eventually my brother Steve got married, built his house there, so then kind of you have to go through his yard and to get on that old trail. So I went down there to look at the creek. I thought that maybe I'd see some ice around the creek, but I didn't see any ice anywhere. But since I was there, I was tempted, I was wooed by the woods to continue on around Steve's house and up through the woods and kind of made a big loop and then come back down through our yard. I didn't really see very much damage anywhere. The most damage was my hostas, but that's pretty typical. At least every other year, if not every year, that happens. They kind of start sticking out of the ground, and then we get a cold snap, and then they'll kind of fade away and come back. That's really pretty normal. And in fact, it's so normal in Appalachia as a whole for these little teases of spring to come. One of my favorite books, The Tall Woman by Wilma Dykeman, there's a line in there where it says spring is chancy. It was one of her favorite times of the year, the character. But spring is chancy because it will be those warm days where you're thinking, can I put my bathing suit on? I used to beg Granny and get in the creek. Or maybe you want to lay out in the sun or wear your shorts to school or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden there'll be the days where the wind comes howling down across the ridges, down through the valleys and the hollers and reminds you winter's not over yet. So that's really typical for March and even on up into April in the mountains of Appalachia. So much so that over the years, Appalachians kind of course, they paid attention, like how I've paid attention enough to know that my hostas they'll be fine. They'll come back out. But they paid attention and they noticed every year about a certain time there'd be a little cold spell. And so they began calling those little spells, because they were kind of like clockwork. You could kind of kind of regulate when they were going to come just by noticing what was going on in the natural world. They named them little winters, so they started calling them winters. By far the most common in my lifetime is blackberry winter and dogwood winter, and that just means that while the blackberries bloom, every time there'll be like a little cold spell. Maybe not as cold as what we're having right now, because that's a little bit later in the year. That's another thing with the little winters. As they progress, they get less severe, but still there'll be a little cold spell that makes you want to put your jacket on and maybe build a fire to keep away the cold. The dogwood winter, the same thing. When the dogwood trees are blooming, there'll be a little cold spell. I've heard a lot of people say it's always cold on Easter. It does seem like there's always a little Easter cold snap. You pick out your nice Easter dress to wear to church and your sandals. You know, you want to be spring-like, and then it's so cold you got to bundle up in a big coat and nobody can't see it anyway. But those are the two, the blackberry winter and the dogwood winter, by far are the most common ones. If I had to guess which one, if I wanted to attribute this little cold, really cold snap that we're having now, this kind of deep freeze, I would say this is redbud winter, because the redbud trees are blooming. So I would say that that's what this is, redbud winter. That's one. I didn't really grow up with that one, hearing anybody talk about it, but since I've researched Appalachia for so many years now, that is one that's very common in other areas, and probably even here with folks that were older than me. Another one that I never really heard growing up, but again I've researched and learned about, is whippoorwill winter. And that one typically was like in early May when you'd have a little cold spell. And again, nothing like what we're having right now. Just a little to get your attention and let you know that, oh gosh, it's not full warm weather here yet. Pap, I've shared this in other videos, he always advised us, and it's what he did. He didn't ever plant any real warm weather crops until after about the first week in May, because he said it's just too chancy, kind of to go back to Wilma Dykeman. Spring is chancy for sure. One other winter that I've read about, again, never heard anybody talk about, is Breeches Winter, and it was later in May. And I've heard it like variations of it, woolen breeches and linsey wool breeches, different ones, but Breeches Winter. Well, you can almost think about that one not really tied to a bloom, I don't think, like the dogwood or the redbud or blackberry, but you can almost think of it as I can. You think about maybe you wanted your warmer winter pants on. So that one, again, in my area of Appalachia, people in my family, they would have probably only had one or two pairs of pants, not necessarily winter and summer, just pants. So I don't think that one would have really applied here, but maybe in other locales. Weather is interesting and fascinating to think about and study about, of course, because it affects us all. And this time of the year, if you're a gardener, you're really, really affected by it, because you're wanting to get out there and get your hands in the good earth and plant all the wonderful things, live off the land for the summer months while you're eating all that wonderful garden produce. So it's only natural that you'd pay attention to those things, and you can see why over the years they just started calling them this winter or that winter. Really interesting though to think about. There are late, you think about, well, like I said, Pap was pretty sure that by the first week in May there'd be no more hard freezes, but sometimes there is a weird something that happens. I don't think, was that last year or maybe the year before, there was a really late freeze that really damaged a lot of stuff on up into May. And Pap's told me a story one time about him and his mother. They were actually out in the garden working with things already coming up, and he said it was a cold day. It was really, really strange. It was cold, and that it snowed. It started snowing. Now, it didn't come a big snow or anything like that, but it definitely snowed enough for them to notice, and they'd even build a little fire beside the garden to keep warm with, which was unusual in those days because they were such tougher people than me, for sure. I can only speak for me, but I know they were used to being cold, in other words, whereas I'm not. I've got my wood heat and my nice tight warm house, and plenty of warm clothes and shoes and all that. So he told me about that time, and I remember several years ago I wrote about it on the Blind Pig and the Acorn. That's a great thing for me. Helps me remember stuff, because once I write about it, I know it's there somewhere. I don't remember the exact year, but it was a strange day in July that we woke up, and it was like this is like fall of the year or something. It's airish outside. It was really strange. And in one of mine and Matt's recent videos, a few people left a comment about experiencing late frost in their area. I think one of them was even in June. So there are some really strange things that happens like that. And it's always fascinating to think about, you know, late snowstorms and those kind of things. But typically for my area of southern Appalachia, after these little winters get over, then true warm weather arrives. And as I said, with each winter, it's kind of less of a winter. So I hope that, you know, I feel bad for people, especially on down through the holler and the settlement of Brasstown and beyond. I hope that nothing got bit too bad last night or will tonight. These deep freezes, though, are just part of life in the mountains of Appalachia. So I hope you enjoyed stogging around the cold with me this morning and sitting by the wood stove. And as always, I hope that you'll continue to drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia.